the program. And so things have snowballed, and we contacted Holly Moore, who I'm about to introduce, and that's how we end up being here today to talk about this this approach to prevention. So Holly Morehouse is the director of Vermont After School, and I think I said more, I apologize. She's the director of Vermont After School, which is serving the state, a public-private statewide partnership dedicated to supporting and sustaining innovative after-school programming. And so Holly is responsible for bringing Dr. Humberto Soriano and Dr. Mann to Vermont to talk about the program and build awareness about how it can make a difference. So Holly is the head of Vermont After School and is working with many of our after-school folks to strengthen their programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Holly, and then after, she's going to introduce our speakers, and then if people wouldn't mind just coming around saying who they are and where they're, what organization they're affiliated with, if they are, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's so great to see all of you, and it's awesome to have a full room up here. And I want to thank Beth and Crystal and Carol and Heather for helping organize this today. The trip, the week here, we're packing in a lot of stuff in just 5 days. I think there's like 11 or 12 different things that we're headed to and doing to talk about the Iceland model and really. In some ways, we need to. It's the Iceland model, but it's really it's youth development, prevention work, a really awesome model that they use in Iceland, right? So we don't need to become Iceland, but we can learn so much from this model and implementing this model. I am thrilled to have both Dr. Soriano and Dr. Mann here. Dr. Soriano is a pediatrician that trains in the U.S., and he also is a liver specialist and a nutritionist and a gastroenterologist, and then he was the president of the Chilean Society for Pediatrics and is responsible for helping bring this Iceland approach to youth and prevention to Chile, where they're looking at implementing it in over 100 cities. So he can talk from the medical point of view, and he'll share with us about why this is important and what they're doing in Chile and how they're using it. And then Dr. Mann he's working with the Iceland team. He's been working in West Virginia. He's at Boise State now in Idaho, both on how do you sort of take this research and this model that's based on these 20 years of what they've been doing, and how do you start to use it and implement it in other communities, both in the States and in other countries, but really that specialties of like, how does it work in West Virginia? How might it work in Vermont? So the two of them are going to tag team on this talk. I'm going to do about 20 minutes each, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and so forth. But following Beth's suggestion, you'd like everybody to go around and just say who they are and who they represent? Okay, great. Catherine, do you want to start?
Catherine Antley, I'm a community dermatopathologist from Burlington, and I went to Iceland 2 years ago to the first conference, and have been presenting around Burlington, all over the state actually, about Iceland since then.
I'm Judy Ashley. I'm the district director for the public health department. We're county, state public health, but we cover Franklin, and Great Falls, and our office is in this building.
And so introduce yourselves.
George Robinson, Grand Isle Mentoring Program.
My name's Savannah. I'm from Charlotte.
My name's Daisy Gabry, and I'm from Chelmsford.
I'm Jill Marshall, I'm from the health department.
Did you sign this?
I'm Destiny Taggy, I'm also from the health department.
My name is Jill Stoller, and I'm from Chelmsford, and represent students.
My name is Joanna Jarose, and I'm the assistant counselor at Shelby Elementary.
I'm Beth Crane.
Caring Communities and Watershed Mentoring.
Hi, I'm Jillian Raw from the Vermont Counter Drug Program.
Carol Lazat, Program Director and Grant Administrator for the Franklin West Supervisor Communities After School and Summer Programs.
I'm Amy Brewer, Health Educator at Northwestern Medical Center and the coordinator of the Franklin Grand Island Tobacco Prevention Coalition.
I'm Faith DuBois with Rise Vermont and Northwestern Medical Center.
Heather Moore, Lee's After School Program Director for Franklin Northeast Supervisor Union.
Can people hear in the back? Project.
Okay, Chris Lukens, Director of Voices Against Violence, Domestic and Sexual Violence Program.
Nina Curtis, Executive Director of the Franklin Grand Island Restorative Justice Center.
Shirley Lennon, nurse at Enosburg Elementary.
Celine Riendo, I am the homeschool coordinator at Enosburg Elementary.
Megan Cesara, I'm a nursing student studying community health.
Neil Smith, I'm a teacher at the local high school BFA. I've worked with on-campus and off-campus programs for about 35 years here.
Crystal Lamon, I'm the Executive Director of Franklin County Caring Communities and the Regional Prevention Partnership Coordinator.
I'm Tegan Dussel. I'm the SAP counselor in Enosburg Falls at the middle and high school.
I'm Heather Simpkins. I'm a public health nurse with the Department of Health serving Grand Island, Franklin counties. I'm Meredith Plumpt. I'm also a public health nurse at the health department here.
I'm Nalini Cheatham. I am a licensed clinical mental health clinician and I work with NCSS and I'm part of their REACH program here. I'm the clinician.
I'm Melanie Gross. I'm the outreach coordinator for March in Grand Island.
I'm Jill Bravo. I'm the CEO of Northwestern Medical Center.
Sally Greeno, Tyler Greeno Fund.
Jillian Ireland, mental health counselor in the community up the street.
Sean Coleman, Senior Planner with Northwest Regional Planning.
Stacy Carpenter, Public Health Nurse here at the Department of Health.
Paul Chapman with United Way of Northwest Vermont.
Marilyn Grunwald, I'm chairman of the Caring Communities, and I also was former superintendent of schools in this area for a few years.
I'm Michelle Quinn. I'm on the Adolescent Services team at NCSS.
Joanne Saunders on the SAP at BFA Fairfax, representing NCSS as well.
I'm Catherine Dimitrick, Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission, serve Franklin and Grand Island counties.
Lisa Horgan, Program Economic Services.
I'm Roger Bushy. I've worked with Beth in the mentoring program.
My name is Mary Pickett. I'm a substance abuse prevention consultant for the health department here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Julie Rollo. I work at Economic Services as supervisor.
And Julie, there's some seats up here. If anyone wants to join us up here.
Yes, I will.
All right, so deep breath. What a great group, right? If anybody can do this in front, I think you guys can. I think you're ready. I had the great privilege to go with Catherine just the week before last. There were 10 of us who went from Vermont to Iceland. And spent a week there and learned about the model. And these guys are going to tell you about the specifics. I just want to share for a couple minutes about the inspiration and what I saw there. And before going, I had read the articles. I had heard people talking about Iceland, and I kind of knew the mechanics. You know, I knew, okay, there's a survey, they get this data, and they do stuff with parents, and they throw in this curfew thing, and then they have a lot of activities and a lot of sports and stuff. And I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. I work in the out-of-school time space, what we call the third space, right outside of home and family, everywhere else that young children and youth are, and how important that space is. And you know, this seemed to kind of resonate. But it wasn't until I got there that I really understood that the model is about culture change. It's about not focusing on the individual and teaching them, you know, to say no to drugs, but not changing the environment around them. It's about changing the environment around young people that then will change their behavior, right? So it's about connectedness. It's about young people being connected to their families, being connected to their schools, being connected to their peers, being connected to one another and to activities. Is really, so it's like some of the presenters and the researchers in Iceland were even to the point, like, you can take out you don't even have to say the whole substance use. Like, that's the outcomes, and we're going to see the charts and the data and you see where their outcomes are so strong around the substance use prevention, but it's really about looking at the society and what's in front of them for the young people and deciding they wanted something different. So a lot of the researchers, and I think Mike has this photo, maybe still in his thing, they show this picture of downtown Reykjavik, and it is like wall to wall, store to store, packed with young people. It's something like 4 a.m. or something like that, and they're all drinking, and they're young, and they talk about kids were drinking. This is like in the late 90s, starting to drink as early as like 13 or 14, and it was kind of accepted, and it was kind of common, and it was 42% of their 15 and 16-year-olds had been drunk in the last month, high rates of use, and as a nation, they took a look at it and said, this is where we are. This is this is what's happening with our young people. This is the environment we're bringing them up in, and we want to switch. We want a different environment. And as a nation, they're small, right? It's an island nation. They're about the size of Kentucky in geography, and then they have about 350,000 people. And one of the things that inspired me is they are a nation that has this pattern, I think, of saying, we're going in this direction, but wait, we want to switch and go in a different direction. So when you go to Iceland, there are not a lot of trees. The island's been deforested. They were heavy reliant on coal. They've got 4 active volcanoes. And it's lava fields, and like I said, there's like no trees, and being from Vermont, you're like, where the heck are the trees, right? But they took a look at that, and they're like, no, we want a different future, right? So now they lead in geothermal energy, right? And we visited a geothermal place where they're pulling up the steam and the hot water from under the ground, and they're sending it to the cities, and they're heating all their houses in the winter, and then they're running the hot water after it heats the house, like under the sidewalks and the roads, so those are clear of snow and ice, and into their fields so they can be active and engaged, right? So they changed the reality. Here's where they were, they changed. Also, I mean, how many of you know someone who's been to Iceland, wants to go to Iceland, is talking about Iceland like tourism, right? Okay, so with the economic collapse, the financial strain, right? They were a nation on the brink of bankruptcy, right? And took a look at that and said, what can we do? How can we come out of this, right? And they turned to tourism. Now it's like the land of fire and ice and volcanoes and glaciers. And I think they said 5 years ago they had something like 500,000 tourists. And this past year they had 2.4 million. Like, everybody's going to Iceland. It's like the hot thing, right? Like, they took the reality where they were and they switched it. And I think it's the same thing with their young people. They took that street full of young people that were drinking and using substance and said, no, we want a different reality. And they based it, working with these researchers, on the data of what their young people are doing, but it's not just the outcome data, right? Like, how much are they drinking? It's the protective and risk factors that are leading them, right, in the environment. What's encouraging the drinking? Where is it happening? When is it happening? What can we switch to change that and to come together as a community around it? And part of their model, it isn't all on the schools. It isn't all on the medical field, right? It isn't all on parents. There's these 4 domains. There are things that parents need to come together around. There are things that schools need to come together around. There are things about peer group. And then they have this whole other space that we would call the third space that they call leisure time. Isn't that a great phrase, right? Leisure time. And it's that time outside of school. And how important that is. So when you go to Iceland now, they have set up an entire system for their young people in this leisure time. They have really focused on sports because they found that that's what was making the difference for their young people. And if you think about physical activity and brain development in young people, right, keeping them physically active is going to help, right? It does tie to prevention. If you have to translate a little bit the idea of sports into just being physically active. So when they get out of school at 1:30 or 2, there's buses to take them, and everybody's doing something. Everybody's got some kind of sport or some kind of thing you're doing, and no one is cut. There is no waiting list. They just make teams A, B, C, D, E, F. And they're real facilities with real coaches that are trained in youth development and sports medicine. And everybody's active every day. If you're not into sports, there's music and arts and other ways. They have a leisure card program where you can go on a website as a parent and you can say, I have a kid that's this old, I live in this neighborhood, and they're kind of things they're interested in, and all the activities pop up, and you can sign them up, and you can apply this financial credit to it to help cover the cost, right? So they changed their society. So now it is a society that is known for being very family-centered. Parents are spending a lot more time with their kids. The kids are all active in the afternoons. Everybody's doing something. There's a lot of physical activity. And the reality that you see in their data has completely changed. And that's the story that these gentlemen are going to share with us on how they got there. So I'm going to hand the reins over to Dr. Soriano first to talk about kind of from the medical point of view and what Chile's taken away. And then Mike Mann will pick up with the implementation on the model. And I think if it's possible, hold the questions to the end of both of them, because I think you'll get different pieces from each of them. All right? All right?
Thanks, Alice. It's a great privilege to be here. It's wonderful to see that in St. Albans, Vermont, you have such interest and such a special group of people wanting to make sure that young people grow healthier, happier, better. I love it that at least 3 people are knitting too, because we pediatricians think that physical activity, as Holly was saying, is key to brain development. We think that hard work in school is good for mental development, and things such as knitting and meditating are good for the soul and the spirit. So, excellent. I was here in Killington 12 years ago skiing. I love your state. I love America. After 22 years, I became American. I thought I'd never go back, but 10 years ago, I had a family crisis. My marriage failed. I couldn't hack it. So I went back to Chile, and going from being the chief of transplantation in Philly, I thought, what do I do now? I was, playing God, changing livers and things. And what's more important than doing something like that? And prevention is. It's what you all are about. Prevention is the key to having a healthier world and a better world. So I was lucky to be chosen president of the Academy of Pediatrics in Chile, and we kind of worked it from there. And the Chilean story, I'm not going to talk about the miners. I don't know if you heard about the miners that were trapped in the bottom of the earth, and it was heart-wrenching how we rescued them. No, I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about a story that might save a lot more people. Yesterday at the Council for Opioids, there was the parents of a girl who had died from opioid overdose. It's terrible. We want no one to die from that. We really want to prevent that. That's a terrible thing to lose a young person. And 2 days ago with Catherine, we were walking on the lake and looking at the house. I mean, how could you not love this place? How could you not want to make it better? And when you talk about these subjects, you want to know who's talking to you, Kids, if you have somebody who's telling you you have to drink responsibly, you have to smoke pot responsibly, you have to consume opioids with moderation, that person has a conflict of interest. That person is talking in the name of big industry, big tobacco, big cannabis, big alcohol companies. Well, we have no conflict of interest. We are getting no money for pharmaceuticals or for anybody else. I get no money from Iceland either. Some years back, we got together, the 3,000 pediatricians in Chile, and said, what do we want to put our money on? What do we want to put our efforts on? And number 1 is decrease substance abuse. Number 2 is decrease obesity. Healthy eating and exercise is key. And you have to do it at your age, girls, because that's when things can happen. When you're my age, it's much harder to get ready with the belly. So you want to maintain high rates of vaccination. Vaccinations are great. Don't listen to the post-truth people who tell you vaccinations are bad. Vaccinations are great. They prevent terrible diseases that get contagion to people with transplantation and elderly people who are more vulnerable. So we need to protect each other by vaccination. Vaccination after age 60 for flu is the best indicator of health and longevity. So those of us who have already been 60 need to get the flu shot every year. So we went to our Surgeon General in Chile is that guy in the middle, and talked to him about all these important things. And we talked about how marijuana and alcohol damage children's brains. Okay, marijuana is not medicinal. So the word medicinal marijuana is an oxymoron. Several very serious scientific studies which have balanced the evidence between the goodness of marijuana preparations and the damage that it does to your brain and to your vital strength are very conclusive in that marijuana hurts. It's the same with opioids. You know, opium will never be medicinal, even if we use morphine in the hospital. If we use codeine, fentanyl, several products derived from opium can be good. But opium and heroin, they're terribly damaging. So is marijuana preparations. And one of the reasons in Chile and the rest of the world marijuana consumption amongst young children have gone up dramatically is that the cannabis lobby has succeeded in decreasing our risk perception. You know, marijuana creams, marijuana oils, marijuana cookies, they're all wonderful, right? Wrong. And we have to transmit this unanimously. The adults in Vermont have to say this without hesitation. Marijuana is bad for children. And, you know, this thing about medicinal marijuana, you know, they say fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? Well, big business has already done this. In the 50s, they told us that cigarettes were good for asthma, that there was scientific evidence on the good effects on smoking. Well, you guys all laugh. Whenever I tell an audience about this, people laugh. But when they tell you marijuana is medicinal, we don't laugh. We think, oh, yeah, maybe. Well, you should laugh, because it's not, because it damages. And this is exactly the same thing that big cannabis lobby is doing. So how does alcohol and drugs hurt children? Because your brain is more vulnerable. For example, her brain, what's your name?
Daisy.
Daisy's brain. Daisy's brain is a wonderful brain because it's growing, it's got plasticity, which means it can adapt. Well, drugs, both alcohol and marijuana, stamp on that plasticity. Her axons, the cables, you know, electric cables are always covered with a sheath, which is plastic. Well, that's called the myelin. Well, Daisy's axons are not covered with myelin. They won't be fully covered with myelin until she's 21. Your name is?
Savannah.
Savannah's brain, when she enters her adolescence, which she hasn't just yet, but when she does, they're going to go through something called neuronal pruning. So there's going to be this gardener that's going to be cutting her neurons and leaving the very best ones so you get a wonderful, beautiful tree. Now, Savannah, do you have a garden? Would you want somebody drunk pruning your garden? Obviously not. He'd make a mess. He'd make a mess. So young people's neuronal pruning should occur free from substances because the brain is too precious a thing. And this information is published not in a local throwaway journal, but in the New England Journal of Medicine. I mean, it's the preeminent medical journal in the field. That's what they tell you. So why? Because some people say, well, you know, but what about my Uncle Roger? He drinks a beer, and when he's with friends, he has a glass of beer. Is that bad? Well, you know, that's up to Roger. It's his decision. But what we do know is that Roger, your uncle, has a prefrontal cortex completed. What does that mean? It means that he can control impulses. Savannah and Daisy and her friends don't have such strong impulse control because the frontal cortex is not complete. What does that mean in plain language? That if 1 in 3 children under 18 drink, as they do in Santiago, Chile, 64% of them go on to get drunk. You adults will not get drunk every time you have a cup of wine. Because we have impulse control. So children have to be protected because their prefrontal cortex is not ready. Is alcohol associated with death? Yes, particularly in young people. You know, driving, motor vehicle accidents are the #1 cause of death from 1 to 21. You know, Savannah and Daisy, I'm sure you wear seatbelts every time, and they wear helmets when they ride bicycles or when they do ice skating, right? Because we protect ourselves from accidents. Now, availability to alcohol is key in getting alcohol. And in many places, such as Chile, 12th graders can get alcohol very easily. And here, people get fake IDs. There are places that don't card. You get an older friend to get alcohol for younger children. We need to stop doing that. We need to get tough on businesses that sell alcohol to card everyone. We need to get a consensus that really alcohol hurts children, particularly under 18. Some people may say, even some parents say, well, you know, I smoked pot when I was little. Nothing happened to me. And it's true because it's a Russian roulette. Not everybody who smokes pot gets addicted. Only 1 in 6. Only 1 in 6. Well, that's a large number. You know, do you want to play that Russian roulette? And is it marijuana your grandfather smoked the same that you're smoking now? No. Here's a graph of how much of the THC, the psychedelic component of marijuana, it's 7 to 20 times higher. So it's a different stuff. It's a lot more dangerous. It's like going from 1% alcohol to 20% alcohol drinks. So a different drug. How does it hurt children's health? It gives learning disabilities. It lowers school performance. It decreases by 50% the entrance to college. It increases the dropout rate. Lancet Psychiatry. Consistent use lowers the IQ point in in 8 points. It's irreversible if started at their age. Who's got IQ to spare? I mean, I know I don't. You know. So marijuana drives them mad. It increases the risk of psychosis, schizophrenia, and other mental illnesses. Again, New England Journal of Medicine, lowest achievements, gives chronic bronchitis. You shouldn't have in a dorm somebody else smoking. Neither cigarettes nor marijuana. It hurts people who smoke secondhand smoke. And you know, some people say, well, you know, but marijuana and alcohol, they're conservative concerns. Well, they're actually not, because these graphs show different schools. These are the public, poorer schools. These are the richer schools, and the public schools are associated with a lot more consumption. So drugs and alcohol affect a lot more people who are in the poverty line, under the poverty line, and people who are more vulnerable. So it should be a liberal person's concern to have children free from alcohol and drugs. And the only way we're going to succeed in this is that people from all walks of life, as I see here, are concerned with having healthy children. What happens with legalization? You have a law marijuana is decriminalized, which is great. You know, you don't want to go after somebody who consumes, because there are people who are very often disease sick. But you do want to go after the drug pushers. You do want to go after those who traffic drugs, and you don't want to legalize. And I hope we're talking to your Senate tomorrow, and we're hoping to share with them information that will make them make the right choice when it comes to making drug laws. And we really hope that either them or your governor veto this law to sell marijuana and make it into a business, because we know that it increases vehicle accidents, fatal accidents, and it doubles motor vehicle accidents, which is what happened in Washington, in Seattle, since the drug was legalized. You know, some people think, oh, you know, it's going to be great for business. You know, it's going to bring money to the coffers of this region, and it doesn't. You know, it's the cost of the healthcare like triple what comes in, and what happens is that all the illegal trade does not go down; it goes up. It's happening in Colorado. It's happening in San Francisco. The illegal trade goes up, not down, when you legalize. So Chilean youth are a little bit like Vermont. We're not the opium capital of the world, but we pretty much have the kids that are the most obese and the ones that consume most alcohol and most marijuana in the whole South American continent, and we're about 3 or 4 in the world. We're record holders. So we're concerned about this, and we want to do something about it. well, this is what happens in Colorado and Washington. This is the national average in the states, and how it's gone up in Colorado, higher, starting higher, and going up, starting higher, and going up. So legalization is not the solution. Don't let your Congress vote for having commercial marijuana shops all over St. Albans. And what the message to the politicians is, you know, what do people care about? What do students care about? What do parents care about? And parents care about sharing time with friends and family. People care about physical activity, which are the pillars of the Icelandic model that Dr. Mann is going to talk to you about in a minute. And what's the main concern about schools? That there's no drugs and alcohols in school. Guns too, but at least in Chile, possible use of drugs and alcohol is the number one concern of people around the world. We don't want children to consume drugs. So what do we do? You know, all those remember that campaign, Say No to Drugs? You know, and you know, pictures of people damaged by drugs and things. Well, they don't work. Because consumption of drugs has continued throughout the last 20 years when we've been doing these scare tactics, which don't. It's okay to tell people that marijuana and alcohol damage, but in terms of changing things, you need something different. What does work? And some 3 years ago, with people from several scientific societies, we were reviewing the evidence of what works. You know, what method, and this one does. This graphic really caught my attention. And look how in Iceland, they were the highest consumption of alcohol of the whole of Europe, and look at how it's plummeted to 5%. Cigarette to 3%. Marijuana to 2%. This is remarkable, I thought. We need to bring the Icelandic people to Chile, I thought. We need to have a huge seminar, talk about it. And they laughed at me. They said, are you crazy? We're not Vikings, you know, we're Latin, brown, small. It's like, what are you talking about? We're all different. And then I thought, well, are we really? I was once in the Field Museum in Chicago, and there's a little man telling us that we were all the same. And I looked at him. He was bald, dark, Asian, had an orange robe, and we obviously thought he wasn't the same as us. He's a Dalai Lama. And he said, well, you know, I don't know why you came here to listen to me, because I've got it all published. You could just go ahead and read it, just like you could read about the damages of alcohol and marijuana. But since I'm here, let me tell you, inside we're all the same. You know, in our hearts, in our spirits, we're all the same. And from a biological standpoint, if I treat Savannah for a tonsillitis, it'll be the same as if I do it at Timbuktu and Kalamazoo or Santiago, Chile. You know, we treat people the same. We use the same science to understand the body and biology. And this is what these people have done in Iceland, is develop a tool that Mike's going to talk to you more about, on how to identify risk and protective factors to change things. So it's a scientific tool to make a difference. And so we brought people over to Santiago. We had the biggest seminar the pediatricians have had ever. We brought the president of Iceland and the two lead scientists, Ingadora and Jon. And we got together with legislators, and we got together with ministers and the executive power, and we told them about something that could work, because drugs are not here to stay. We don't have to give up, and Vermont can do it. So, you know, closed captioning. So why Iceland? Because, well, we said children's biology is the same, because other Nordic countries do worse, other small islands do worse, and it focuses in the here and now. It's a custom-made suit. It's, you know, what St. Albans needs could be very different what Burlington needs, or some other rural community in Vermont. So having here and now data, and it's key, and because it works. So these are different. Is Icelandic Nordic flags? These are different Nordic countries, and here Iceland is 8%. Other Nordic countries just as Viking, just as blonde, and they got 56% of use. So it's not that they're Nordic, that they're doing better. Well, somebody says, well, Iceland is a tiny country, 300,000 people. Maybe it's just because they're a small island. But if you compare consumption in Iceland and Malta, another small island that also belongs to the European Union, well, very different results. Why? Because Icelandic people are using this model. So what do we do as a people? We get together and we look for our authorities to support us. So here's with the First Lady of Chile, here's with the Minister of Education of Chile, here's with the President of Chile, trying to tell him where the evidence lays. And here is, at the beginning of last year, starting a pilot study with a university to see what was happening in Chile and to use this model in the first 6 municipalities in Chile. And these were the different townships that participated. They were 10th graders. It was this tool, scientific tool, more than a questionnaire, 300 variables, 8,000 youth, more than 100 schools. What did we find? We found that we smoke, average. It's been going down, though, because people are realizing that smoke is bad. Everybody knows now that smoke is bad. How much alcohol? About 1 in 3 of those 10th graders get drunk in the past month. That's huge. That's higher than most everywhere. But there's a lot of townships vary a lot. So we got to focus on this township that has 32% of. So this helps us garner resources for what you need here in St. Albans. Marijuana use also high, also great variability amongst different townships. And so what does consumption has to do with whether parents know where you, Savannah, is in the evenings? Does mom and dad know always where you are, Savannah? They don't? Well, you should tell them, and they should know. Why? Because this is the children whose parents don't know where they are in the evenings. And they consume 2 and 3 times more substances than those children whose parents do know. This is not about political or religious views. This is about scientific evidence. So people get bored in school. Daisy, do you get bored with school? Well, that's something your parents should know. That's something your school district should know. They should do something about it. Chilean schools are also boring. It's bad. We have to work on it because that correlates with, I don't have anything to do, so, might as well have fun, drinking or smoking something. And it varies amongst schools as well. So in this school, we've got to work more than in other places. A lot of people in Chile allow their children freedom because it's all about freedom. We're all liberal. We love trans people and we want everything to be like modern. And so we let our kids out after midnight and 40% of our kids are out after midnight, young kids. Well, those kids that are out after midnight in yellow, again, consume 2 and 3 times more substances than those that are not. So this is not about a curfew. This is about parents talking to each other in the schools and agreeing on reasonable times, on reasonable schedules. So the summary of conclusion, so we did this, and then the Icelandic people gave us a prescription. They made a diagnosis, what was wrong with those 6 townships, and what do we need to do? Well, we need to try to agree on go down on the numbers. We need to curb the thriving alcohol culture. We need more parental collaboration. We need less unsupervised late outside hours. We need better funner schools, and we need to have recreational extracurricular activities such as Holly's doing wonderfully here in Vermont. So conclusions put together, Chilean adolescents appear to be commonly bored and poorly supervised, together with a high degree of societal acceptance of adolescent alcohol use, high rates of other substances, thrives because tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and opium are a continuum. They're the entry drugs. And beware that excess electronics also are an entry drug because they also strengthen your dopaminergic addictive pathways. So, you rather than tell children, don't stand in front of the PlayStation, you tell them, how about we go for a walk? How about, we dance, we play cards, we do something different, offer alternatives. You don't want to prohibit, you want to offer better alternatives. So here's a couple of months ago with the Prime Minister, And that's a bald guy in Chadwick in the white hair. And he promised, he started to expand the Icelandic model to the whole of Chile. So within the next 2 years, we're going to have the whole of Chile adopting the model. And it's going to be the Chilean model of prevention, because we don't adopt, we adapt, and we change it to our own community and our own culture, because that's what you have to do, because people in Vermont are very different from Iceland as well. So these are my 2 3-year-olds. You know, I work for them, and I work for their future, as do you. Thank you.
Thank you, Humberto. How you guys doing? You all right? I've been talking to you for a long while. I don't like it when Humberto talks, because he always makes this joke about when you get older, the belly, and then he touches his, which you know is ripped. You know what I mean? And then I come up, and it's like, oh, you know, this is what you want to be worried about, kids, not that. So my job today is actually to talk more about the nuts and bolts. I feel like when it comes to talking about the Icelandic model, the easy part is selling people on the results. I mean, that's not hard. You know, we showed that diagram, and you know, the one that starts at 42% of 10th graders binge drinking, and then it plummeting over 20 years to 6 or 7%. Everyone's like, yeah, that sounds good to us. But often explaining how it works can be a little bit challenging. And I'm going to tell you right now today, let me just kind of punt on this. Most people, it's going to take a couple of times to go through it, because it's very, very different than what we're used to. I mean, I came up with a public health education and health education and promotion, and we're used to really developing programs that work for individuals, that are very individually focused, that are very education focused. And although we learn about things like the socio-ecological model, which we're going to talk about, we really don't see it done very often, or done in a way that works very often. And so, you know, I guess I'm going to ask you if you can bear with me in the beginning. I'd appreciate it. Just a tiny bit about my background. Before I started working in the university setting, I spent 20 years as a teacher, principal, district level administrator. I was an alternative school teacher, principal, district level administrator. Actually, the reason that I got the degrees in public health that I did is because I started working at this alternative school. This is how old I am. Back when you didn't have to have a teacher certification to teach an alternative school. There were 2 requirements. One was that you could pass the GED, and the other is that you could not get your butt whooped if you're in a room full of kids with felonies. Seeing I grew up a kid, you know, a little bit on the edge, we did all right together, and I squeaked by the GED. So that's what I did for a long time. But working in the same communities with kids with the same problems, I selected my college degree based upon what my kids needed. I loved being a principal and teacher with them. I was a principal after I had degrees, but I loved being a teacher with them, and really decided what I want to do with my life. And honestly, working in that community with those kids that actually looked a lot like the community and kids I was and grew up amongst, that just resonated with me. That's what I wanted to do. And we were lucky. We had a tremendous amount of success. But what I will tell you today is we did what very many of us do. We stumbled into success on accident. You know, we were desperate. When I became a principal, I was the 8th person they asked. Mostly because they were playing hard to get. Like, I know they wanted me like the entire time. You know, stringing me along with the 7 job offers before me. But the 8th, and it was, I mean, we were desperate. I mean, literally, I walked into the school. I won't bore you with all the details, but there was no way we were going to make this work. And out of desperation and good luck, we did a lot of the things that you were going to talk about the Icelanders doing. What I love about this model is it's not desperation, it's not luck, but it's planned, it's scientific, it's thoughtful, it's carefully evaluated. And I've spent the past 10 years working at the intersection of public health and public education as a researcher, doing all kinds of things. And so this is where I guess I'd start. Really, when we think about how to start preventing substance abuse among young people, the key question is to think about how youth substance use begins. Like, what's the actual entry point? And what I would suggest we start with is the idea that adolescent substance abuse is not randomly distributed throughout the population, right? Not everyone is at high risk of becoming a substance user as a young person. And really, if we think about it, a huge chunk, and people are going to say, not all, we can come up with the outlier case all day long. Well, I knew a kid who grew up, had the best family, the best schools, and the best community, the best everything, that chose to, use substances and became an addict. Of course, we can find a story like that for almost any situation in the world. But we know that on the whole, people are more likely to actually, their behaviors reflect their environment a little bit. I'm going to suggest that most of us, at least when we were kids, ate pretty similar to our parents. Right? The things that we were raised eating are the things we crave now. The reason my belly is different than Humberto's is I'm from Alabama. And so when I have an emotion, if I'm sad, I eat fried chicken. You know what I mean? If I'm happy, I eat fried chicken. And so, you know, but the environment we grew up in actually influences the behavior choices that we even think are possible, much less begin to have the habits to choose. Not to go over this in too great a detail, if we just imagine, though, one young person that grows up in an area that's full of high crime, that grows up in a family where their parents are separated, both parents are working minimum wage jobs and aren't able to put very much energy into being with their kids, that they're a chronically underperforming school, that their peers commonly use substances or are subjected to family members that use substances in the home, and they have limited opportunities for organized recreational and curricular activities, and then they go to the young person who has the opposite profile. My question to you is, who is more likely to use substances? And we know the answer is one. We don't like the fact the answer is one, but we know the answer is one. And so the environment that young people grow up in matters when it comes to what they are most likely to choose. You know, we often in public health think about the causes. You know, so we know someone's using a drug, and we think about the individual and all the things that contribute to that. You know, whether they are things like a lack of purpose, boredom, depression, how they're doing in school, how their families are doing. And what we often ask young people to do is, you know, and what we often try to prepare them to do is to swim upstream against the current of the society that they live in, right? If we take profile youth number one, that, you know, there's a stream flowing, basically pushing them towards use opportunities. And what we do is we say, hey, you, what I want you to do, swim against the current, no matter how hard it is. And we give them a bunch of training and educational opportunities, and then expect them to pretty much shoulder this on their own. What this model is suggesting is that instead of asking young people over and over again to swim against the current of what a community might be presenting to them, is that we actually change the way the stream or the current of society is flowing. And we move to thinking about the causes of the causes, the social and environmental risk factors that lead young people to being likely to choose those opportunities. This is the goal in a nutshell. The goal of the Icelandic model is, instead of asking young people to swim against the prevailing current of whatever community culture we're in, really what we're trying to do is change the direction of that so that young people who may have been likely to use substances are now very unlikely to use substances. As opposed to asking young people to swim against the current, we're asking us as adults to create an environment that takes someone who may have been vulnerable before and makes, you know, and kind of elevates their situation so they're much less vulnerable than they ever could have been before. I think assumption number two of this model is that individual behavior change is really, really hard. So for those of us who have grown up eating fried chicken, I mean, even for those of us who have never used substances, even thinking about any behavior change that we want to make on our own is a very, very challenging proposition. We were talking to some people the other day whose daughter had substance abuse issues, and they had been to rehab 25 times or so and still were struggling. So getting ahead of the problem is actually kind of a common sense solution, right? We know that there's a huge cost to letting addiction take root, and then changing that is really challenging. And so what we're trying to say is we create an environment in which we've prevented that addiction to begin with. As difficult as changing our environment seems like it is, being an individual struggling with changing addiction is even more difficult, not to mention how that impacts families and communities and the like. And so it's difficult. The CDC agrees with us. You know, they would suggest at the top of this pyramid, the health impact pyramid, counseling education is important, but it requires, and we can never do without it. It's always going to be a part of the formula, but it can't be the main part of the formula if we really want to get ahead of substance abuse. And instead, what we have to move is to this: changing the context of an individual's default decisions to becoming healthy. That the environment we're in just has tons and tons of healthy options. And again, you know, here's an example. This is from actually the Dr. Frieden's article, the idea that personal lifestyle is socially conditioned. What we think of as individual decisions really have been conditioned by the people we grew up around and live among. Individuals are unlikely to eat very different than the rest of their families and social circles, and it makes little sense to assume that would be otherwise. Assumption 3 is that there are no quick fixes. And for those of us, so many of you here have described yourself in being positions in socio-prevention work. This is what we're used to. We're used to getting a grant for 1 year to 3 years to solve a problem that is a 20-year generational problem. And I'm going to suggest that, my grandma used to say that you can't talk your way out of a situation you behaved your way into. Right? You got to behave your way out of that one. What I'm going to suggest is you can't solve 20-year problems with a 1-year grant, especially when the grant is us delivering. For those of you who do this, I apologize. This is a part of the solution, but it can't be by itself, especially if we're doing a 9-week program on whatever. That's just not going to solve this level of problem. It can be a part of solving it, as we're going to get to in a second, coordinating and having multiple strategies working together. But for being someone who's worked in those kind of programs, we're all asking for more help. A principal, we're all asking for more help from families and communities and that kind of thing. So one thing is, I think, perfect in thinking about the Icelandic model and why it works is stepping back and realizing that the scope of the problem, they're trying to match the scope of the solution to the scope of the problem. Does that make sense? As opposed to just saying, oh, we're never going to be able to do that. All right, so quick theory and practice. I mentioned the social ecological model before. Most of us know what that is. The idea that the individual by itself can't just make decisions, but we're influenced by multiple levels of society, interpersonal, our family and our friends, organizational, whatever organizations tend to surround us, community, government, public policy. In this example, I wish they had another circle that said culture, but that's okay. And really what the Icelandic model did was the Icelandic developers did was adapt this model. And really what they said is that young people, in the context of their local school, community, governments, that kind of thing, there are really 4 main areas of influence that we want to improve the level of protective factors and decrease the number of risk factors. And so what they decided to take a look at was school. Clearly students spend a huge amount of their days at school. Leisure time, which is any time outside of school and not with the family. Family time, which clearly is time with the family, and then time they spend with their peer group anywhere at all. And so really, if you take a look at the heart of the Icelandic model, what they do is this. Most of us are exhausted by data-based decision-making kind of things. There's more data, we need to use more data. Data is critically important, and it's essential in this model, but they do something different. I'm sure many of you have taken a report, and what happens is you look at a problem and there's a long list of outcomes we've asked people questions about, right? And we look at this report as a school principal, we'd have a school climate report, I get a report with 200 outcomes. And I look at it and nothing told me a few things. Nothing told me what was more important than other things. Just like, oh, there's 200 things, I've got to fix them all, this is overwhelming. And then nothing ever said anything diagnostic. There were never any questions about the risk and protective factors likely to lead to that outcome and which ones of those we should focus on specific to the school I was in or the community I was in. Does that make sense? And this is a very different way of using data. They're collecting a whole section more of data that we don't usually look at. So for instance, what is it in schools that we can change that will make substance abuse more likely? What is it in leisure time that we can do differently that will make substance abuse more likely? And on for each community we're a part of. When I say community, I mean the school I'm here now, we get one report, and the school 10 miles away will get another report that looks different based on the factors that are most predictive of their young people and their young people's families. Does that make sense? So there are a few guiding principles. We don't have a lot of time, so I won't go over them in great detail, but I would say this. I think another important difference in this model is that it's very structured. For those of us who are used to doing community work, we're used to some general phases. We build a coalition, we collect some data, we try and align ourselves when it comes to strategies. We may or may not collect data again to see if we've made any progress. We only collect data around outcomes, never around risk factors, and we very rarely assess how well we are working together as a community and track our progress when it comes to developing our capacity to work together and to solve problems. And so this, I think, one difference is, although you'll see some parts of it that are similar to the work we've used, we've been used to doing, they've actually structured it in a way that is really, really helpful and that I think drives us to a positive outcome. I'm not going to tell on myself. In my principal days especially, I sat on coalition and coalition after this, similar to what we're in this room talking about right now. And I'm sure you guys do way better than we did, but do you know how much progress we made on solving these problems in the late 90s and early 2000s? We made zero progress because there was, although we were capable professionals, we were massively dedicated, there was another level of structure we needed to drive us to successful outcomes. And one thing I love about this is that they have that in place. So this is a primary prevention approach, guiding principles, primary prevention approach designed to enhance the social environment. This really emphasizes community action, engaging parents, community members, business members, professionals, and it gives them data and diagnostic information specific to them. Let me tell you this, when you sit with parents, I've done this many, many times with parents in communities in West Virginia. We present this data to parents, and there are a few things that are different in the way the data is presented that just gets them on the hook. To be able to say that you're saying that in this community, parents who did X, X, and X had this much better outcomes than parents who did X, X, and X, when they have that level of specificity down to their local neighborhood, man, the level of attention is really, really different. And so this really, I think, emphasizes community action and really embraces public schools. As a principal, I will say this, I didn't want any more surveys, any more demands, whatever else. But I will say as a principal, the second you start collecting data that doesn't just put the responsibility on me, but asks more of the leisure time group in coordination with them, asks more of families in coordination with them, then we're in this together. And I'll tell you, we have had no problems as principals getting excited about this idea of building a team that supports schools and helps them as well. So really, the essence of this is to engage and empower community members to make practical decisions using local, high-quality, accessible data and diagnostics. So that's helpful. To integrate community members, policymakers, practitioners, researchers into a unified team dedicated to solving complex real-world problems. And last but not least, to all of you come together to match the scope of the solution to the problem. We're not going to talk about all this. But I do show this just for 1 second to demonstrate that there is a very clear structure that's different than some of the theories we're used to working with. And this clear structure can take you, it's a weird balance. On one hand, there's a lot of flexibility for local community members to find solutions that work best in their backyard. That, I think, is a great strength of this approach. At the same time, there's a lot of structure that helps guide you through that process and make certain that on an annual basis, through repetition, you're doing certain things that drive you to the most positive outcome possible. A quick overview, I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's, one section of this is around how we just assess community capacity and build capacity where it's necessary. Another around data collection, diagnostics, and dissemination. And then another section around how we structure our community response to that data. So you've given us a report. It's talked specifically about how each community within our community is different. It's helped us communicate that effectively to parents and all kinds of different stakeholders. It's helped us engage them. But the next step is, how as a community we set goals around 2 or 3 or 4 things that alter the social fabric of where we are each year and make some progress on that and track our progress in terms of not just outcomes, but also in terms of risk factors. And then ultimately are able to align our policy and practice and then immerse children in primary prevention environments and activities, and then repeat that every year. And the repetition is important. This isn't a program as much as it's changing the way we do things and just an expectation. You go to Iceland right now, everyone knows every fall, every spring, there are things we're going to do when it comes to this. Every family member knows we're going to show up. That's what we do now. First 10 years it wasn't like that, but over time, this is what we do, and it gets ingrained in the culture, our expectations of how we should just move forward together. In a quick nutshell, all this really is doing is speeding up the cycle of helping researchers, policies, and practitioners, and when I say practice, I mean families too, and the whole community at large, of us working more effectively together. Here's a fun example of what I mean speed up. We collected some data from local communities in West Virginia at the end of November, the week after Thanksgiving. They got their diagnostic reports from us in February. So often I think Vermont uses YRBSS data. How long does it take for you to get that data? Yeah, a year and a half to 2 years. How much information, and I'm not digging on the CDC too much because I have actually friends who work in this area. I know they would like it to be different, but how much risk and protective factors do you hear about? How much diagnostics do you get in that report that suggests what the solutions are moving forward? Not very much. So really what we're used to is everyone working uncoordinated together. We like each other. We show up at meetings, we try our best, but there's some structure missing that helps us really coordinate the activities between researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and community members. And really what this approach is doing is it's kind of aligning, it's a structure that helps us align all of our efforts together and work more effectively as a team. Just as a really quick aside, what we're used to seeing when it comes to the Icelandic model are all the outcomes, right? But most of the report really aren't about outcomes, they're really about these things. So for instance, in one of the risk factors is how much time children and parents are able to spend together. And so one of the things we report on is how changes in parents' time spent with children change over time. And then for each community, if that's one of your goal areas, how that's impacting substance abuse in your community. We might look at things like increased parental monitoring, which just means parents knowing where their kids are and how that changes over time. Increased participation in organized sports. Often you'll hear about sports in the Icelandic model. And again, that, they did the same data analysis for them, and they sat down and said, as a community, what are the community strengths we can bring to our third space or to our leisure time? And that culture, sports is a big deal, and so that's what they brought. What you bring during that space might be very different, but the idea of identifying those needs and bringing resources and attention to them as appropriate, makes the most sense. Less late outside hours. So these are some examples of things that you might see, and then they lead to results like this, which Humberto just showed this slide, and you can see others where Icelanders, when they do initiate substance abuse, it is much, much later, as opposed to 13, 14, and 15, they're 16 years or 16 years plus. When it comes to the European studies, they're the lowest across the board on every single outcome. And then this brings us to this kind of summary slide. People will often say, a lot of this sounds similar. Like we talk about a lot of these things. We talk about data, we talk about community capacity, we talk about communities and policy being more aligned. We talk about the importance of risk and protective factors. So what's different about this model? What sets it apart? And I think there are a few things. As I've mentioned several times, it's a strong but flexible structure that's time proven that supports a few things. Matching the scope of the problem, treating society or the environment as the patient. Society is the patient, not individuals, and trying to make our changes there. And then really these next three things are key. It's really shown the difference, the ability to sustain community attention, which is those of us who are practitioners, we know something bad happens, the community does what? Man, they care a lot. And then 2 weeks pass, and we don't have a lot of traction until what happens? Something else bad happens, and we got a lot of attention. And what this does a really good job of helping keep the community paying attention to what matters over long periods of time. The other thing it does is it really does a good job of connecting young people. People will say that the opposite of addiction is connection, or the antidote to addiction is connection. And this model does a great job of not only connecting young people to adults that care, a community that cares, to a future that matters, but also does a great job of keeping the adults and professionals connected to each other, making a team of adults that's working hard to create a culture and environment that's good for kids. It does a really, really good job of effectively organizing collaboration as a treatment, and then really building and relying on community-specific leadership. I will say this is not a McDonald's approach. This is a framework that can organize the efforts you guys are all bringing, but it absolutely relies on engaged community members who are able to say, okay, thank you for identifying these problems. Thank you for identifying some opportunities. But then being able to step in and say, these are the resources and gifts we have in our community that we can bring to bear as solutions, but solutions that are very targeted to what the data suggests might be the most helpful in the individual case. And of course, it leads to really positive and powerful outcomes. Young people who have the futures we want all of our kids to have. All right, I'm going to shut up now. You can applaud at that. It's usually at this point. Oh my God. Thank you.
Want to take some questions?
Or you can just celebrate the greatness. I'm sorry.
I have so many questions. I'm so excited to hear all of what you shared. I've worked in prevention for a long time, not just in public health. I understand all of it. I think one of the challenges is the changing the parent culture and the marketing, the big tobacco type culture as well. You know, you hear those. Currently we're in a state of, alcohol is really good for economic development kind of arguments, and it's individual right to be able to market those products, whatever, whether it's marijuana, whatever. And you also hear parents echo, like, it's my right to be able to choose to give this substance, whichever it might be, to my kids. And I'm wondering whether that has been something you guys have experienced in West Virginia, or Idaho, or Iceland, or Chile, or what are some community responses to those kinds of things?
Do you want to take the first swing? Because I'm loaded for bear on this one. Go ahead.
Well, I was at a hospital in Philly, and I had a Jehovah's Witness, 12-year-old who had liver failure and was bleeding, and all the elders told me I couldn't, and the parents told me I couldn't give transfusions, so this child was going to die. And the parents told me it's my freedom to decide what my child receives. But it's not what the law says. The law says you have to protect children. So we went to the courthouse in Philly, and the judge gave me the right to protect that child. And he got a liver transplant, he got better. And for years, the whole family came to me, and they were so happy, and they were so thrilled that their child survived. And they would bring me leaflets of how important it was to become a Jehovah's Witness all the time too. It's not okay to advertise drugs to kids. It really is not. A parent does not have the freedom to give opioids to his kid. That is a felony. So, I'm sorry. We have a responsibility to protect our children. That's what I would say. And marijuana, again, is not a medicine. And yes, it's wonderful. You got microbreweries. And if you want to bring your friends from out of state on a tour of the breweries, that's fantastic. Just don't bring Savannah along to drink up with you, It's like there are things for adults and there are things for children, and children should not drink because their brain is different, and we have to understand that.
I'm also asking about that perception. You have your perception of harm slide at the beginning, and I think the economic development and the perception of harm among parents also changes the youth perception of harm. And now that we have the microbrew, and everything else, it just changes those messages.
It's a tricky thing because, and I'm not going to say this is I'm going to give a very, I'm often accused of giving like unfiltered, just like raw, like honest answers. All right, so this is terrible, I apologize. Really what we have to do is we have to create a culture change. Culture is everything we know that we don't know we know, right? There's all of our assumptions. I moved from Alabama to California, and for the first year I thought, oh, like, that person's weird. And then I realized, oh, this like whole state is weird. You know what I mean? Like just the culture. And it's not really weird, it's just different than the cultural messages that I got growing up. But they're all the unconscious things they were not necessarily aware of. Now we know cultures can change. I mean, the culture around beer here is very different than it was 20 years ago. That is a cultural thing, that this is good, that we like it. By the way, I'm not saying that adults can't like breweries and drink a beer here and there. I'm not saying that every part of that culture is bad, but if it gets, I had a mentor would say that your weakness is your strength misapplied. So we just assume that everything we do that works for adults is also okay for children. That's a problem. And we can shift that culture. I think one thing that's helpful about this model is, very often the forces, at some point you said, yeah, we believe that individuals should be able to market beer.
I don't believe that.
No, you don't. The culture believes that. What I'd say is individuals almost never market beer. Massive corporations with giant marketing budgets, they are the ones who market beer. And if we're going to counteract that, often what you need, absent that kind of budget or that kind of organization, is numbers of people coming together to speak with a unified voice. And I can give you a long list of different times this has happened in our culture. We can start with like workers' rights, changes to education, all kinds. We can run through opportunities there. But one part of this model, that's a part of it. I think what you'll find is when you start bringing families together and community members together, it's going to be hard pressed to find a majority of community members that don't say, yeah, our kids shouldn't be strung out on opioids. I don't want my kid to be addicted. I don't want my kids' friends to be addicted. And to learn to speak more strongly with the community voice. But the more people are separate, the easier it is. The lobbyists who win these fights are organized, well-funded, and working together. And for communities to be able to counter this, they have to be at least organized and working together and working really, really hard towards well-funded, which I actually believe we can get there too. And so that's, I don't know, so this helps create some balance.
Excuse me, big cannabis and big alcohol, know fully well what science is known for a long time. If you start them young, they do better.
Yes.
That's why we do Little League when they're 5 or 6, And if you start them exercising young, if you start them eating healthy young, then it's much easier to prevent obesity than to treat it. Same with drugs. So you really, all of you who care about children and who work in prevention have to have the guts to speak out. And speaking out means going to the radio, going to the local publications, speaking out at parent-teacher associations meetings. You need to be advocates, because if people such as yourselves who are working on prevention are not advocates, there's not going to be change.
I think too, if we have a community adopt this model and start to make the change, and start to see the differences and start to see the data go down, that will trigger the next. I think that is powerful. Like having the data, doing the process. I'm like an implementation person. I'm like, let's start working, let's get it going on the ground. And that, you'll have we'll have naysayers. Well, they talk in Iceland, you don't get every parent, but you get enough parents, and that if my parents aren't engaged, but all of yours are, and I'm friends with you, I'm still going to benefit from that. Like making it happen. At some point with this, we have to stop talking about the theory and not do the doing. And I think that's what you're trying to do, and trying to find the money to start the doing.
So my thought is, I can see where parents will be on board with this. I can see that. My thought would be, it's not really a question, but just to put out there, because I think we all need to start thinking about this. I come from a very different diversity stance, where we're not just looking at, okay, implementation, I can see how that can be done. What I'm looking at is, when we are looking at how our actual culture of race and racism and discrimination and prejudices, how that has evolved or is evolving, I'm just thinking about, okay, how do we make communities where, when you look at that overlap with the individual, the peer, and the school and all that, how do we make that connection for a person who is not just diverse, but a visibly diverse person? How do we create a community for them so that they feel like they belong and they have that connectedness? Because we don't have that. Vermont is a very white state. And there is, on a very intellectual level, everybody's agreeing, but when it comes to implementation and creating that safety, creating that space where you can go to something as opposed to drugs or alcohol or a behavior that could lead you down, there isn't that much out there. It's all at we're working in a vacuum. And so where do we break that? Where is it? I'm just thinking out loud.
So in terms of diversity, the Icelandic model is being applied in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. So it works in all different cultures. So it's
I think your point, those spheres aren't working together, right? Right now in the leisure time, maybe you have access, maybe you have money, maybe just looking at the sports, we were talking about this yesterday, right? You get cut in middle school if you're not good enough. And to be good enough in some of the sports, you got to start when you're 4, and your parents have to pay money, you got to travel to the tournaments. So we're telling young boys and girls that before their bodies are even developed that they're not good enough. We're making that hard, but if we have this culture change where it is every child and every day, every community has these realms, and then how can we use this data to drill down to what you're doing, which is the details. It's not enough for me to say every child needs access. I need to actually understand who's not getting access to the basketball team or to the arts program, and why are they not getting access? What's making it different about their situation? Is it color? Is it their parents work, they don't have transportation? And then as a community, we can fix that. It's like Catherine talks about, it's like having this diagnosis for what's wrong. You know, instead of just saying, well, something's wrong, it's actually understanding, well, it's the liver or it's the heart or the whatever, and this is the treatment. Like, this is going to help that young person get that access.
And sometimes to get the parents to actually buy in. Like, yes, your culture, we're not saying anything about your culture, don't change that. But look at what is going to benefit your child. Sometimes it's my mother used to stop me from going and being with other people because they're so different. But Mom, what they're doing are actually good, and I want to be, no, you can't. And it's like, oh my God, you know, so I can't talk back to my mother, but somebody should be able to.
I don't know how scary is your mom. I mean,
that's my concern. I mean, when I work with their adolescent population or very early adults, they're 26, 27, 28, and they still call their mom, or their mom makes appointments for them. I'm like, okay, so, you know, so just getting to talk to the mom about that. I think that's where we need help.
It's the scale of the problem. It's culture change and it's working on the details at the same time.
I'd like to say that I don't think it's just whether you have physical differences, you know, that state that, you know, we're obviously from different cultures. It's also the social norms, in my opinion, that have been driven from, you know, things like the eugenics movement in Vermont. You know, how many people sitting in this room are actually Abenaki, and because of, you know, that culture and that social norm, we've been hiding in plain sight for many, many generations.
Yeah. But this is...
And also, when I think about, you know, like that historical trauma in my family, I also think about how many times throughout my life my gut told me this is wrong. But my social norm said, put it back in the closet, shut up.
Social norms are tricky. You know, what we know about social norms is that people, I mean, you know, there's a social norm, like this is what we think everyone's doing, but it's often disconnected from data almost entirely. And so, you know, I often use college students as an example. You know, for those of us who went to college, you're sitting in your like freshman English class, your first year at college, and it's Monday and everyone's talking about the weekend. You know, and the stories you hear are the outlandish ones, right? You're like, oh man, you know, Becky got drunk, you know, Bill rolled in at 5 a.m., he vomited in a boot, you know, whatever. It's just always these outlandish stories. And so everyone thinks what? On the weekend, everyone's doing what? Behaving that way, because that's what people talk about. It's fun to talk about. It's, you know, dramatic. It's whatever. Let's talk about what you never heard. Oh man, last weekend, like, I had a super responsible weekend. I had a lot of goals around studying. You know what I mean? I wanted to get a certain number of pages read and report done. And, man, I nailed it. Like, you mean, I read the hell out of those pages. You know, and so social norms, what we think of social norms is often a distortion from reality. One thing, why I think this is so powerful in actually shifting culture is it does two things. It gives enough information at a granular enough level that you can dispel many of these myths. And the other thing it does really well is it organizes people around this to create a conversation that can then, you know, develop a team of adults that can begin addressing how we move forward in shifting the culture together. I would suggest even the worst cultural messages we think are out there, there are still more people who want to do right by their neighbors and do right by their children than not. But very often they're like that reasonable conversation. They don't get heard because they're just reasonable. And what this does a good job of bringing reasonable people together and having a reasonable conversation about what kind of future we want for each other and our children and our community, and then deciding how to move forward together as a team. And so that gives me a little hope seeing this done in many places.
I remember in my freshman social class reading about George Simmel, something about the stranger. He said sometimes people from somewhere else, they may not belong, but they have perspective. So I'm thinking like someone like you, maybe you come from somewhere else. You know, I dragged my dad to some mini metro game, and I pay the money, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous, but my kid loves basketball, so I'm like, okay, whatever. So I dragged my dad, he's 91, and he's just like, he's British, and he's looking around, he's like, boo. What? This is so strange, all these coaches and all these people and all these adults yelling at the kids. It's like, it's sort of silly. He's like, when we were young, we used to just play, you know, and I'm like totally agreeing with him, but he's from somewhere else. And that's the culture here, and we don't even know what we're from here, and our, you know, we've been doing it for years, and so, you know, someone from somewhere else might come and be like, you know, no offense, but this is kind of strange, and it may be fine, but you might want to look at it a different way. So I don't know, just my...
I mean, perspective never hurts, and perspective can come from all kinds of places, you know, I mean, and so yeah, perspective is, I mean, I think diversity of thought is generally good for us. I have no idea, there's so many hands, I'm overwhelmed. Holly's in charge.
It seems like municipal governments have a big role to play here, but like principals, they're asked to do too many things and not enough time. Can you share some successes on how to get municipal governments engaged in caring about this community model?
You know, this is my first trip to Vermont, so I've talked to groups like you. You're all wonderful, and everyone's been really receptive. I'm going to use West Virginia as an example because I just meant I'll be there longer and do more. And I don't think West Virginia is special in this way. I think being motivated. I think in West Virginia, every municipal leader has stories of young people in their community who have been ravaged by this issue. They've seen potential harm, not only in their communities, but in other places that are having even more problems than they are. And not only do they want to be responsive to the young people from their communities that they care about, but they absolutely want to prevent things from getting worse than they already are. And most of them have seen things progressively get worse over time, and they don't want to get to the worst case kind of scenario. So finding municipal leaders to be on board has been really easy for us so far, at least, because they have, I mean, I think most people who run for elected office, they do it because they want to do good things at some level. And so this is a pressing issue, and so having some support that for is easy. People thought for sure that schools would be impossible to get into. I have not talked to one principal who hasn't dove all over this. And the issue is around, as you know, I'll give you West Virginia 2 years ago, the legislature said they needed to be a primary driver of solving the opioid crisis. No money, no training, no whatever, just schools fix it, and they're kind of overwhelmed. I mean, you know, because things are getting added. The fact that this model gets other people on the hook with schools. So that's a great strength for schools. Look, what this isn't is another thing in which we are going to assess you and blame you for not doing enough. This is something we want to do to understand the kids who are in the neighborhood that surrounds a school and to better engage families, leisure time folks, and other community professionals to support the work that you should all be doing together. Believe me when I tell you, I mean, teachers, principals, you can feel pretty alone as a teacher and principal. You can feel pretty much as though, you know, that you're the enemy sometimes. One of the strategies we used in West Virginia when we kicked this off that was often selected by communities was, here's a fun one, when a kid gets in trouble, the parent will not say a word about the school to the kid until they've heard from the teacher or principal. So a kid comes home mad, oh, you know, Miss Beverly's so unfair, and what the parent will usually do is be like, yeah, Miss Beverly is unfair, you know, and then call the school mad. What are you doing to my kid? Then we're going to wait. We all know we care about children. We all know we're on the same side. I'm going to hear my kid and say, this is important to you. It's important to me too. Let me talk to your teacher in the school, and then have a reasoned, you know, response to that. I can't tell you how many principals and teachers go, yes. It's amazing. So now we're not adversarial with families. I mean, there was a time when we weren't very adversarial. Now we kind of are, and now we're working to solve that. Schools get really excited about that kind of collaboration. Things can be very, very different in Vermont, but it's hard for me to imagine that they're that different.
I think the connectedness around the efforts, I mean, one of the conversations we're having in Vermont, we've been doing a lot of work around the importance of the third space and the importance of that time, right? So communities are getting excited about that, but then we're like in this battle, well, who owns it? Who's going to pay for it? Who owns it? Is it the city? Is it the, you know? And I think that this starts to move, and then it's the whole community, right? And there's all these roles, and so you don't have Carol or Heather off really working hard over here on prevention, and then the school day is doing this on prevention, and then the city's now going to do, but we actually are like, it's that connectedness that is aligning, and it's like you said yesterday, like the model gives kind of a backbone, you know, to all those strategies, and I'm thinking that maybe that's going to help us get that that key, because we are having these very active in a number of communities about, is it the town or the city or is it the school, and it's kind of like a hot potato, but everybody kind of wants it, but nobody, you know. So how do we move past that? And I'm hoping that this joint ownership, based on what the kids are saying are the risk factors and protective factors, and what that moving is going to show that shared piece, I hope.
And I don't want to scare schools, because the thing that's good about this is the flexibility. It can be applied different ways in different communities based upon their resources, strengths, what this community wants to do. But a good example is lots of schools. I mean, as a principal, our school is open until 11 o'clock every night of the week, Saturdays and Sundays included, with someone saying, oh, we want to have a third space, but we don't have facilities. Well, you have our facilities, and people are like, oh, as a principal, I don't want to do that because I don't want to clean up after somebody. Using something like the Icelandic model, we realized how little we cared about that. It helps keep your eye on the ball. What I care about are these outcomes when it comes to kids, not being in charge, not being, it's us working together, and this sense of collaboration as a treatment, I think, is a strength of this.
Paul?
This isn't a statement, it's actually a question. But I'm wondering about, we talked about the difference between adult use and kids use. And I think neuroscience has given us that very lucky excuse for our behavior that, as an adult it's okay to do this, as a kid it's not. And I guess I'm wondering, in both of your experience, can those two cultures exist, or we say kids don't do it but adults it's okay, or have you found that your work has changed adult culture, or does it matter?
Do you want to speak to that? It's a tough one, because we pediatricians teach that you have to lead by example. I mean, if you're an addict, the likelihood of your child consuming is obviously much higher. But you also, we don't want to go back to prohibition. If you go out with your partner and have a drink in a restaurant, it's perfectly fine. But if you're inebriated and if you're drunk in front of your kids, or if you smoke a joint in front of your kids and you're high, well, you're giving out the wrong message. I guess the two good news I see is that you've got in St. Albans a critical mass of people who care. You guys care. You're going to come home to your friend Savannah and you're going to tell them, there's something we can do about this problem. This is going to tell everyone that it doesn't have to be this way. Children have the right to grow up healthy. Children have the right to grow up free from alcohol and drugs, and we have a way to achieve it. There's now a prescription. We got a patient with pneumonia, but guess what? Fleming invented penicillin, so it will get treated and it will get better. And since you're one of the states that's going to adopt this massively, you might be the state with the least consumption in children 10 years from now. That's our hope.
The focus of this hasn't been on adults, clearly. I mean, it's been on children. But this is what I would say, taking the long view. And this isn't anyone trying to trick anyone. This is just like the logic of the situation. If you have young people who grow up finding satisfying ways to engage their life without, participating in this stuff, it's likely to positively impact adult behavior. And that doesn't mean adults, like Humberto said, won't have a drink here or there, but I would love for adults to have far more responsible use. I would love for, we know that the way we use alcohol, for instance, causes a lot of harm among a certain segment of the population. We know a lot of premature death is associated with that. Deaths related to things like suicide or homicide or domestic violence. So the idea that we start with children and do a much better job of teaching them how to, function around substances, do we believe that that's likely to have some kind of positive impact in adulthood? I mean, I think it's like a logical thing to hope for, but it's nothing that at least I've been a part of evaluating in any rigorous way.
There's one group in which we are passionate about, because science is quite clear. Pregnant women should definitely keep away from alcohol, drugs, and any substance, because it terribly impacts the growing child. It damages their brain. It makes them be born sick. So pregnant women surely should keep away from drugs.
One of the things we saw in Iceland was they're now, the kids who started this model 20 years ago, who've grown up with that culture, are now coming of age. And one of the things they kept showing us was these photos of the Iceland soccer team that beat England in the World Cup, you know, like this little tiny island nation, and those, and they had all kinds of like these young people, but it is different. Like it's very different for, you know, and they're in their 20s now, so we don't, you know, they don't know, and I don't know the studies, but it is different when you've played sports and been active 4 and 5 days a week, and it's part of your culture, and your family spent all this time with you, and this message is substance use is not okay, kids being isolated is not okay, you know, and that's across the culture. I was talking with a parent there who had gotten a message from the municipality, and their holidays are coming up, and they're going to have some days off of school, and it was a simple little email that came to every parent in the city, and it was like, happy holidays, enjoy your time off, remember it's really important to spend that time with your kids. Like, you know, that much sort of ingrained, you know, is where they are, and it is going to look different. It is changing the adult behavior.
And interestingly, the message to Daisy and Savannah is not don't drink, don't smoke. The message is wait at least until you're 18 before you do.
24.
That's why I said at least.
Time for one more question.
I think that she had.
You talked to them about it. When you were saying that your school is open till 11 o'clock at night, you know, and I know that everybody gets mostly freaked out about funding. Where are we going to get the money? Who's going to shoulder that responsibility? And I guess I'm somebody that likes to kind of step back, look at the situation, and see how we can just do it differently. Like we had, this is the money that we have, right? So how are we going to do that differently? It made me think of my friend who lives in New York City. You know, her daughter goes to a private school, and every single student has to. It's not like an option. You have to participate in some kind of sport or music or art program, whatever, every single season. I think they do it like by trimesters or whatever. So even if we thought about doing something like that, you know, everybody say, oh, we need more time in the school day to be able to put towards more academics. Well, what if we pull out some of the specials that we have? We have them at the end of the school day. We're always worried about after-school care, right? And you know, we look at it in terms of that's when our specials are happening, our music, our art, and we can put more time to that. We can put more time to, you know, academics during the day. We can pull up the money that's you know, funding that during the school day and putting it towards our after-school program. So I just feel like we just need to look at doing things differently instead of the way we all, you know, think in a school, right? We have that schedule, that bell from the beginning to the end of the day. We don't have to do things, you know, that way. We have so many options within a school day to just teach our kids differently. And then all of our kids are participating in activities, and they all take the late bus home.
Right, and it opens up that space. We're not trying to, we're very prone to cram things into the school day. Because right now in our society, that's where all the kids are. If you want to hit all the kids, they have to hit the school day. But if we shift the system so that all the kids are also in the leisure zone, leisure time, third space, you know, Carol's program or Heather's program, it's a whole nother, boy, that opens everything up. 80% of their waking hours is in that third space, right? It's like 6% with family, 14% in the school day, and 80% in that third space, outside of, you know, family and school. That's a big space that if we can think about differently. Did you want to?
No, I just agree with you. I mean, I completely agree. This idea of just thinking about, and that's what I kind of like about it. It helps us kind of move through a process of thinking about the resources that are available to the community. And let me say this clearly. I would. Hello, state of Vermont. I mean, I believe that most communities need more resources, so I don't want to be ambiguous about that. Most communities could benefit from having a lot more financial resources. That said, what you're saying is in the meantime, how do we think about, how do we intelligently use what we have, and how can we do things differently in a way that make a difference? You know, an example I used the other day was, you know, I became a principal. If you had said to our faculty, and our staff and our bus drivers and all the people who worked with us, who's in charge of promoting student health, no one would have raised a hand. Maybe the health teacher, they would have been like, not me by myself. Like, I would be a little, like, it's this much, you know? And so But 6 months later, not because of me in particular, but some things that happened, 6 months later, you ask, and every single person would raise their hand. All of us are in charge. This is what we're all going to do. And then if you'd ask them 6 months after that, you'd say who's in charge, and they all would have raised their hand and started making the list of all the different partners that came into our school, from public health, from behavioral mental health, from different hospitals. I mean, parents. I mean, and so that's the kind of thing. And we left. Most. And I hate. It's just the unfiltered part of me. Because we don't often work together, we often, someone will say, oh, I'm going to advocate, I need to do this. Well, by ourselves, we can go, oh, how can I move the needle? It just feels like too much, and very often we just don't do as much as we would otherwise. It's very different when you look around and go, oh, these are the people I'm going to advocate with. It just feels like something we can bear together. What's too much for one person to bear by themselves, if we can come together effectively, we can distribute that and we can make some progress together. And that, again, is one of the things that I love about this, is how do we not leave any of the gifts and resources and talents of the community on the table, but instead engage it all and get it all activated. And let me say this, I think this is a good point for me just to deflate everyone's hopes really quick. This, I don't think...
You're going to end with that?
Yeah, because I think it'll end optimistically. I don't want to make this sound easier than it is. Let me say this. This is not complicated. There are things that help you move through a process, but especially for the first 2 to 3 years, it is hard. And it requires us to come together and to at least have a core of us that says, you know what, I can handle 2 or 3 years of hard to kind of make that shift. And then after that, we're going to have enough people at the table that the momentum really begins to accumulate. If you look at those graphs, the top of them, it's going down, but it's going down in little increments. And then you watch it start to drop as that sense of community momentum gets gained. And so, people say to me, I've seen this work too many places to suggest that it doesn't work. It absolutely works. But I already like you guys a lot, so I'm going to say, it's not complicated. It takes some hard work, but if we're really engaging the community, it's hard work we can get through together. And when I talk to individuals about this, I'm nervous. When I look at this room and hear all the different organizations you represent and all the different expertise that you have, I have no doubts about this place. This isn't easy. You guys can do this.
So I just want to take a minute and honor the talent in this room. I just think that it's quite amazing that Vermont has assembled international crew of such talented people on really just such big heart. Not big money. I mean, I just want to honor that. And everybody who's really stepped up, from Ingadora, who started, and Jolinda, who brought Holly and I together, and these two fellows who decided to come of their own time off of their professional time, their leisure time, to come and be with us here in Vermont. I just think that's wonderful.
Well, and you guys deciding to be here and everyone caring so much about this. I mean, the whole room resembles what you just said.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you guys.